Ladies and gentlemen, in my presentation Wirtschaftspolitische Leitlinien in Wirtschaftskrisen, which also will be translated in guidelines for an economic policy in economic crisis, I already made the suggestion that during economic crisis, structural deficits of demand, as is the case today, should be compensated by state spending based on credits of the central bank. Because state spending financed by central banks is causing an increase of currency in circulation, and that may encourage inflation, normally this possibility is not taken into consideration, and central banks are entitled to grant credits to public authorities only up to a small amount. But in the present crisis, we face a so gigantic scarcity of economic liquidity, for which the reasons I also try to explain in the guidelines, that we can speak of a situation for which the American president of Fed, Ben Bernanke, mentioned that in these cases the state should distribute money by throwing it from helicopters as a means to ease the economic difficulties. According to newest announcement, in order to increase the money supply, the American Fed intends to buy state loans up to an amount of $300 billion. But that already means central bank financed state spending. Increasing debts also mean increasing interest burden. That could be avoided insofar the state will be given the money at a no or low interest rate directly from the central bank, instead of selling the loans on the capital market at usual interest rates to private persons who pass the loans to the central bank. Due to the great importance of central bank financed state spending during an economic crisis, I want to stress my suggestions already made in the guidelines once more, adding conditions which have to be observed and how to withdraw surplus money when the economy is booming to avoid inflationary tendencies. I believe to have sufficiently explained that the real reason of the economic crisis is the discrepancy between capital to be invested and, in the view of the capital owners, acceptable investment possibilities. For if all earned income, which equal offered products and services, would be spent again, there were no economic crisis, only if, as for the time being, the worldwide volume of savings don't find enough investment possibilities, goods and services will remain unsold, with the consequence that in the next period less will be produced, and insofar also less will be consumed and invested, and we will have a continually shrinking market till at last savings and investments are equal. The lack of demand is of course intensified by increasing income disparities, for thereby the saving rate becomes more than proportional, because as a matter of fact wealthy people normally are able to save more. Possibilities of investment that make sense are only to be found if there are enough inventions which cause innovations. But already for a longer period, that is no more the case. In the last about 10 years, the capital surplus was invested first in speculative expectations of possible innovations, so-called dot-com blaze of the new economy. After the speculation broke down, a real estate speculation made men all over the world invest in junk properties. The deregulation of the capital market, which increased the possibilities of the banks to grant credits, and which commonly is called to be the only cause of the crisis, at most has only encouraged the speculation. For without deregulation, the crisis would have come earlier, maybe not so intensively. In the years before, the United States and Great Britain were already aware of this danger. Therefore, the deregulation was planned to avoid the crisis by securing sufficient bank credits. Other states followed to give their banks the same advantages. The main cause for the economic crisis was the structural discrepancy between capital looking for possibilities to invest and the lack of attractive investment chances, a gap which normally only can be closed by fundamental innovations, a diversification of industrial development in developing countries, and or a decrease of the income differentials, as I'm explaining more thoroughly in the guidelines. During the worldwide economic crisis of 1929, the lack of demand could only be compensated by state investment in infrastructure, for instance highways, armament and war. That's why we have to expect the necessity of extraordinary state spending properly for many years. In case the existing investment possibilities are too risky and savers are also not prepared to consume more instead of investing, it is not acceptable that the state should take over the free liquidity to relieve savers of the necessity to spend their money, and that the state should even pay interest for that. Paying interest for public debts is only justified when public borrowers compete with private investors. But that is not the case in the present crisis. If the central banks see the necessity to increase the money supply by purchasing public loans, they should buy these loans directly from the states at no or low interest rates. Doubts that granting credits of the central bank directly to public authorities will facilitate inflation is not justified in cases the credit grants are based on monetary policy necessities. That means not the necessity to close the gap between the demand and supply of goods and services, but to secure an appropriate money supply. For anti-cyclical state spending is not a task of central banks. Central banks are only in charge to guarantee sufficient money supply. Insofar as central bank is indifferent towards the alternative of purchasing public loans from the capital market or directly from the state. Correspondingly to the quicker money supply by open market operations in form of purchases of public loans, you have a more effective decrease of the money supply by selling public loans as well. Also in these cases, a central bank is indifferent towards selling the loans on the capital market or giving them back to the state, which has to finance these repurchases by its tax or other revenues. But the direct grant of credits to the state should include the obligation of the state that the central bank is authorized to cancel the credit if monetary policy aspects will make it necessary. In case the state has not the means available to take its loans back, it must sell corresponding loans on the capital market. But then the state is competing with private capital demand, and therefore it is justified to pay usual interest rates. In that case, the state is not in another position as if he would have got his financing already at the beginning from the capital market.